The cabin was burning. Tom Brennan pressed his back against splintering wood, blood seeping through his flannel shirt where the bullet had grazed his shoulder. Smoke choked the air. Duke lay motionless in his arms, his German shepherd, his last companion, the final thread connecting him to his dead son, Michael. Outside, Senator David Harrison's voice cut through the howling blizzard. "It's over, old man!" Tom's hands trembled as he cradled the dog who had saved his life twice in Afghanistan. Duke's chest barely moved. The tumor had been killing him slowly for months, but this wasn't how it was supposed to end. 3 weeks ago, Tom had paid his last $100 for this abandoned cabin in the Adirondacks. He'd come here to die quietly, away from pity and nursing homes. Instead, Duke had scratched at a door no one had opened in 25 years. Behind that door, they'd found Rebecca Morse's body, and now they would both pay for that discovery. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks earlier, the veterinary clinic smelled of disinfectant and fear. Tom Brennan sat in the cramped examination room, his calloused hands resting on Duke's graying head. The German shepherd lay on the steel table, panting softly, his once bright eyes clouded with pain. Dr. Patricia Morrison set down her clipboard. She was younger than Tom's daughter would have been, if Sarah had lived long enough to give him grandchildren. "Mr. Brennan, I'm sorry. The tumor has spread to his lungs. We're looking at 2, maybe 3 months." Tom's jaw tightened. He'd survived the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. He'd watched his wife Sarah waste away from cancer 2 years ago. He'd identified his son Michael's body after a drunk driver ran a red light 5 years back. But this, Duke dying, felt like the final thread snapping. "What are the options?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "We can try aggressive treatment, chemotherapy, radiation. It might buy him 6 months, but the quality of life—" She trailed off, her expression saying what her words wouldn't. Expensive, painful, futile. Tom looked at his bank statement that morning. $847. His monthly veteran's pension was $1,200, barely covering rent on his 1-bedroom apartment. Sarah's medical bills still haunted him. $45,000 in debt. Duke's treatment so far had cost $3,500, borrowed from the VA emergency fund. How much would treatment cost? $15,000 to $20,000. Tom closed his eyes. Duke whined softly and pressed his muzzle against Tom's palm. This dog had been Michael's partner in Afghanistan, a military working dog who'd detected IEDs and saved countless lives. When Michael died, Duke came to Tom, the last living piece of his son. For 5 years, Duke had slept beside Tom's bed, had licked away tears Tom wouldn't let anyone else see, had been there through every nightmare and every empty holiday. "I'll think about it," Tom said, though they both knew what that meant. That afternoon, sitting in his apartment surrounded by photographs of Sarah and Michael, Tom made a decision. He wouldn't watch Duke suffer through futile treatment. He wouldn't die alone in some sterile nursing home where Linda, his judgmental sister, insisted he belonged. He'd find somewhere quiet, somewhere they could both have dignity at the end. The newspaper lay open on his coffee table. Estate auction listings. One caught his eye. Abandoned cabin, Adirondack Mountains. Minimum bid, $100. The auction took place on a gray January afternoon in the Essex County Courthouse. Tom arrived early, Duke limping beside him on a frayed leash. The dog's breathing had grown labored overnight. They didn't have much time left, either of them. The courthouse annex smelled of old paper and burnt coffee. A dozen locals clustered near the folding chairs, their conversations hushed. Tom took a seat in the back row, Duke settling at his feet with a heavy sigh. The auctioneer, a round man with wire-rimmed glasses, droned through seized vehicles and foreclosed properties. Most items sparked brief bidding wars. Tom watched families compete over a used pickup truck, a set of farm equipment, a small house on the edge of town. Then the energy in the room shifted. "Next item," the auctioneer announced, adjusting his glasses. "Parcel 7B, known locally as the Morse property. 160 acres. Single-structure cabin. Unpaid property taxes, 20 years delinquent." He paused, glancing at his notes. Minimum bid, $100. Silence fell like a curtain. The couple who'd been bidding enthusiastically on everything suddenly found their shoes fascinating. An elderly woman in the front row crossed herself. Tom noticed a weathered farmer shaking his head slowly. "Do I hear 100? The auctioneer's voice held no enthusiasm. Tom raised his hand. $100! Every head turned. The stares weren't hostile, they were pitying. The elderly woman whispered something to her neighbor. The farmer looked away quickly, as if watching a man sign his own death warrant. "I have 100, the auctioneer said, speaking faster now. "Do I hear 150? No one moved. "Going once, going twice." The gavel cracked against wood. "Sold to the gentleman in the back for $100. Tom approached the clerk's desk to complete the paperwork. The young woman, processing his payment, kept her eyes down, sliding the deed across the counter as if it might burn her fingers. "You'll need to sign here," she murmured. "And here." "What's wrong with the property?" Tom asked. She glanced up briefly, then away. "You should ask around town, sir, before you go out there." Tom paid in cash, 5 $20 bills that left him with $747 to his name. He folded the deed into his jacket pocket and headed for the door. Duke struggled to keep pace, his back legs dragging slightly. Outside, the winter air bit through Tom's thin coat. He was loading Duke into his beat-up pickup when someone called out, "Mister, wait!" An older woman hurried across the parking lot, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. She wore a wool coat that had seen better decades and carried herself with the careful dignity of someone who'd worked hard all her life. "Martha Henderson," she introduced herself, slightly out of breath. "I run the general store on Main Street." She looked at Tom with troubled eyes. "You bought the Morse cabin." "That's right." "Sir, I don't know your situation, but that place—" She stopped, choosing her words carefully. "Henry Morse's daughter, Rebecca, disappeared 25 years ago. Just vanished one night. He spent the rest of his life looking for her, died of a broken heart 5 years back. Nobody's been in that cabin since." Tom met her gaze steadily. "I appreciate the warning, ma'am. The locals say it's cursed. They say Rebecca's still there somehow, waiting." Duke whined softly from the truck. "Ma'am," Tom said quietly, "I'm not afraid of ghosts. The living have done me far more harm." The drive to the cabin took Tom deeper into wilderness than he'd ventured in years. 8 miles off Route 73, the paved road gave way to gravel, then to dirt barely wide enough for his truck. Snow had begun falling again, fat flakes that stuck to the windshield faster than his worn wipers could clear them. Duke sat in the passenger seat, alert despite his illness. His ears swiveled at every sound, that old military training still sharp even as his body failed him. 20 minutes down the unmarked trail, Tom encountered the first obstacle. A massive pine tree lay across the path, its trunk easily 3 feet thick. The tree was old, weathered gray, but something about its placement bothered him. Tom had spent enough time in forests to recognize when nature acted randomly and when it didn't. He got out to examine it. The breakpoint was too clean, too uniform. Someone had cut this tree years ago and positioned it to block the road. Not impassable, but difficult enough to discourage casual visitors. Tom spent 30 minutes clearing brush to create a bypass, his shoulder aching from old war wounds. Duke watched from the truck, occasionally whining with concern. Back on the trail, they encountered more subtle deterrents. A thicket of wild raspberry bushes crowded one side of the path, forcing the truck dangerously close to a drainage ditch. A section of road had washed out or been dug out, requiring careful navigation. None of it impossible, but all of it calculated to make reaching the cabin as uninviting as possible. The sun was setting when the cabin finally appeared through the trees. It sat in a small clearing beside a frozen lake, surrounded by towering pines heavy with snow. The structure was smaller than Tom had imagined, maybe 800 square feet, built from dark logs chinked with crumbling mortar. A stone chimney rose from the center, covered in moss. The porch sagged on one side, but the roof looked intact. Tom killed the engine. For a long moment he and Duke sat in silence, both studying their new home, the last home either of them would know. "Well, boy," Tom said quietly, "this is it." Duke's tail thumped once against the seat. The cabin's door was unlocked. It swung inward with a long creak, revealing a single large room shrouded in twilight. Tom's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a space frozen in time. A simple wooden table stood in the center with two chairs tucked beneath it. On the table sat a ceramic coffee mug, its rim marked with the ghost of lipstick from a quarter-century ago. A burgundy winter coat hung on a peg by the door, its pockets sagging with the weight of whatever remained inside. Against the far wall, a narrow bed frame held a bare mattress, and beside it, a bookshelf still held its volumes. Textbooks mostly, their spines faded. But it was the photograph on the wall that stopped Tom cold. A family portrait, the kind taken at those mall studios. A man in his 50s with kind eyes and laugh lines. Beside him, a young woman, barely more than a girl, with dark hair and a smile that radiated warmth and intelligence. She wore a graduation gown. The caption at the bottom read, "Rebecca Morse, High School Valedictorian, 1997. Tom did the math. She would have been 19 when she disappeared. The same age Michael had been when that drunk driver. He turned away, pushing down memories that never stayed buried for long. Duke had moved past him into the cabin, his nose working methodically across the floor. The dog's behavior shifted when he reached the far corner of the room. His body went rigid, ears pinned back. A low whine emanated from his throat. Tom followed Duke's gaze. At first he saw nothing, just the junction where two walls met. Then his flashlight caught it, a small door, perhaps 3 feet high and 2 feet wide, painted the same dark brown as the wall panels. It was designed to be overlooked, to disappear into the woodwork. An old padlock secured the door from the outside. The lock was weathered but substantial, and beneath it, Tom could see scratches in the wood, deep gouges, as if someone had tried desperately to claw their way out from the inside. Duke began to scratch at the door, whining with an urgency Tom hadn't heard since their days in combat zones. Tom didn't sleep that first night. He built a fire in the stone hearth, laid out his sleeping bag on the wooden floor, and sat with his back against the wall, staring at that locked door. Duke refused to leave it, lying with his muzzle pressed against the gap at the bottom, occasionally whining or pawing at the wood. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the windows. Inside, shadows danced across the walls, and Tom found himself thinking about Rebecca Morse. 19 years old. Vanished without a trace. Her coffee cup still sitting on the table where she'd left it. Around 3 in the morning, Duke's whining grew more insistent. Tom made his decision. When dawn broke, he would open that door. He spent the dark hours examining what he could see of the cabin by firelight. In Rebecca's bedroom, he thought of it that way now, he found her diary on the nightstand. His military training had taught him to respect the dead, but it had also taught him that intelligence could save lives. He opened it. The entries were mundane at first. Classes at the community college, complaints about her pre-law coursework, excitement about her internship at the district attorney's office. Then, 3 weeks before her disappearance, the tone shifted. November 28, 1999. Found something strange in the case files today. D.A. Harrison's signature on evidence logs that don't match the chain of custody reports. Probably just clerical errors, but it's weird how many there are. December 3, 1999. Asked Mr. Harrison about the discrepancies. He got really angry, said I was overstepping, but he's supposed to be mentoring me. Why won't he explain? December 10, 1999, I think something bad is happening. 3 cases where Harrison prosecuted, the evidence doesn't add up. In one, a man was convicted of assault, but the medical reports say the injuries happened 2 days after he was already in custody. How is that possible? December 15, 1999. Found financial records, wire transfers, large amounts. D.A. Harrison is taking money from somewhere. I don't know what to do. If I'm wrong, I ruin my career before it starts. If I'm right, the final entry was dated December 19, 1999. Going to Harrison's Christmas party tonight. He asked me to come early, said he wants to discuss my concerns privately. Dad says I should go to the police first, but I need to be sure. I need to give Mr. Harrison a chance to explain. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation for all of this. I'll write more when I get home. She never came home. Tom closed the diary carefully, his hands shaking. Not from fear, from rage. He'd seen this before. Young soldiers who discovered corruption, who tried to do the right thing, who ended up dead in ways that looked like accidents. Rebecca Morse had found evidence of something, and someone had made sure she never told anyone. As gray dawn light filtered through the dirty windows, Tom retrieved his toolbox from the truck. Duke watched intently as Tom approached the locked door with a hammer and crowbar. The old padlock resisted at first, then gave way with a metallic snap. The door swung open. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it a smell Tom recognized from his time in Vietnam, the sweet chemical odor of death, mixed with something else. Formaldehyde. Photography chemicals. It was a dark room. Small, maybe 6 by 8 feet, with a sloped ceiling. Red light bulbs hung from the ceiling. Developing trays lined a wooden counter, and against the far wall stood an old chest freezer, the kind Henry Morse might have used to preserve game meat. Tom's flashlight beam found the freezer's power cord, unplugged, lying on the floor. The unit had been dead for 25 years. Duke whined, but wouldn't enter the room. Tom understood. He didn't want to open that freezer. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to call the police, to let someone else handle this. But he thought of Rebecca's diary, of her father Henry, who died never knowing what happened to his daughter. Of Martha Henderson's words, they say Rebecca's still there somehow, waiting. Tom lifted the freezer lid. The body inside had been partially preserved by the cold, though decay had done its work over a quarter century. But enough remained to tell the story. A young woman, dark hair, wearing the clothes described in the missing person reports Tom had read at the library yesterday. Jeans, a green sweater, one shoe missing. Her skull showed obvious trauma, blunt force by Tom's estimation. But what stopped his breath was her hands. The fingernails were broken and bloody. The inside of the freezer lid bore deep scratch marks. She'd been alive when someone locked her in here. She'd died trying to claw her way out. Tom backed out of the dark room and vomited in the snow outside. Duke followed, pressing against his leg in silent support. When Tom could breathe again, he returned to the dark room with his phone, photographing everything, the body, the evidence, the scratch marks. Then he saw the folder, tucked beneath Rebecca's remains, waterproof, sealed. Inside were documents, financial records, wire transfer receipts, names and dates, and photographs. Surveillance photos of District Attorney David Harrison meeting with known criminals, accepting briefcases, shaking hands with men whose faces Tom recognized from old news coverage of organized crime trials. Rebecca had gathered evidence, and she'd hidden it in the one place her killer apparently hadn't thought to look: under her own body. Tom was sitting on the cabin steps trying to process what he'd found when the vehicle arrived. A county sheriff's SUV rolled into the clearing, moving slowly through the snow. Tom watched it approach with the wariness of a man who'd learned not to trust authority without question. Duke growled low in his throat. Sheriff Rick Coleman stepped out, a big man in his 50s with a weathered face and cold eyes. He wore his authority like a shield, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Mr. Brennan," Coleman said, his tone falsely friendly. "Heard we had a new resident. Thought I'd come by, make sure you're settling in okay." "Appreciated, Sheriff," Tom replied carefully. Coleman's eyes swept the cabin, lingering on the open door. "Place been empty a long time. Lots of history here." "So I've heard." "You been inside much? Exploring?" Tom read the real question underneath. "Have you found anything?" He'd learned in Vietnam that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one wearing a friendly face. "Just got here yesterday. Still getting the lay of the land." Coleman took a step closer, his casual demeanor slipping slightly. "Thing is, Mr. Brennan, this property, there's been some legal questions about it. County might have to reclaim it. Technical issues with the tax sale. You might want to think about moving on before you get too settled. I have a deed legally purchased." "Deeds can be challenged." Coleman's voice hardened. "Man your age alone out here 8 miles from the nearest help. Accidents happen, especially in winter. Floors give way, chimneys catch fire. Old men with heart conditions." He glanced at Duke. "Sick dogs. Things can go wrong fast." Tom stood slowly, his military bearing returning. "Sheriff, are you threatening me?" "Just stating facts." Coleman smiled without warmth. "You're trespassing on an active investigation site." "That darkroom in there, part of an old missing person case. You go poking around, contaminating evidence? Well, that's a crime." "How do you know there's a darkroom?" Tom asked quietly. "I didn't mention it." Coleman's expression froze for a heartbeat, long enough for Tom to see the truth. The sheriff knew exactly what was in this cabin, had probably known for 25 years. "Small town, Mr. Brennan. People talk. Henry Morse was a photographer. Everyone knew he had a darkroom." "I see." Coleman pulled a business card from his pocket, dropped it on the porch step. "You find anything unusual, you call me directly. Don't talk to anyone else. Some things are better left alone. For your own safety." He returned to his SUV and sat there for 5 minutes, making a phone call, his eyes never leaving Tom in the cabin. Finally, he drove away, his tires deliberately churning up the snow, making the trail harder to navigate. Tom picked up the business card. On the back, someone had written a phone number in pencil, different from the printed office number on the front. Duke whined and pawed at Tom's leg. "I know, boy," Tom said quietly. "We've walked into something big." He went back inside and secured the darkroom, closing the door but not locking it. Then he sat at Rebecca's table with her diary and the evidence folder, reading through everything carefully. The pattern was clear. Day Harrison had been taking bribes to throw cases, to lose evidence, to let criminals walk free. Rebecca had documented it all. And when she'd confronted him, he'd killed her and hidden her body where her own father would never think to look. In his dark room, in his freezer, in his own home. For 25 years, Henry Morse had lived in this cabin, probably walking past that locked door every day, never knowing his daughter's body was just feet away. The cruelty of it made Tom's blood run cold. His phone had no signal this far out, but he had options. Tomorrow he'd drive into town. He'd find help. But from who? If the sheriff was compromised, who else might be on Harrison's payroll? Tom spent the afternoon reinforcing the cabin's security. He nailed boards across the windows from the inside, leaving only small gaps to see out. He positioned his rifle near the door. He gathered wood for a fire that he'd keep burning all night. Duke seemed to understand they were preparing for a siege, staying alert, conserving his failing energy for when it would be needed most. As darkness fell again, Tom sat with his back to the wall, Duke beside him, and thought about Rebecca Morse, about her courage in pursuing the truth, about her father's heartbreak, about justice delayed so long it had become almost meaningless, almost, but not quite. "We're going to tell her story, boy," Tom whispered to Duke. "Whatever it takes." Duke's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the wind picked up again, and in the distance, Tom heard the sound of a vehicle engine. They were coming back. The engine sound faded into the night. False alarm, or reconnaissance. Tom couldn't afford to assume anything. He checked his rifle, counted his ammunition, 12 rounds. Not much if they came in force, but enough to make a statement. Duke had fallen asleep by the fire, his breathing labored. Tom watched the rise and fall of the dog's chest, each breath a small victory against the tumor eating him from the inside. How much longer? Days? Weeks? Tom had brought him here for a peaceful end. Not this. "I'm sorry, boy," he whispered. Morning came gray and bitter. Tom's joints ached from sleeping against the wall. He was 68 years old, playing at being a soldier again. But some things you never forgot: how to read terrain, how to identify threats, how to survive when the odds turned against you. He needed help, real help. But Sheriff Coleman's visit had made one thing crystal clear: the local law enforcement was compromised. Tom thought through his limited options. The state police, maybe. The FBI, they'd want jurisdiction, evidence, time to build a case. Meanwhile, Tom would be vulnerable, isolated, a loose end waiting to be tied off. Then he remembered Martha Henderson. She'd warned him about the cabin, but her warning had felt genuine, concerned, not threatening. Start there. Tom loaded Duke into the truck, sealed the dark room carefully, and drove the 8 miles back to civilization. The town of Keene Valley was small, maybe 1,500 people, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business. Henderson's General Store sat on Main Street, a weathered building that had probably looked old when Rebecca Morse was born. Martha was behind the counter when Tom entered, her eyes widening with recognition and relief. "Mr. Brennan, thank God. I worried you might—" She stopped, glancing at the only other customer, a young man browsing the hardware section. Tom waited until the customer left. Then he leaned against the counter and spoke quietly. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you something. Do you believe Rebecca Morse ran away?" Martha's hands stilled on the cash register. "No, I never did." "Why?" "Because I knew that girl. She adored her father. She was excited about law school, about making a difference. The police said she left her car at the cabin, must have met someone and driven off with them." Martha shook her head. "Rebecca's car had a flat tire that week. Henry was supposed to fix it. Why would she drive a car with a flat tire 8 miles into the woods just to abandon it?" "What was she like?" Martha's eyes grew distant with memory. "Bright, passionate. She'd argue about justice and fairness until you wanted to stuff cotton in your ears, but you couldn't help admiring her conviction." She paused. "She was doing an internship with the DA's office. District Attorney Harrison back then. He's Senator Harrison now. Made quite a career for himself." "Did she ever mention problems at work?" Martha studied Tom carefully. "Why are you asking these questions?" Tom made a decision. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. Not of Rebecca's body, but of the documents he'd found, the wire transfers, the evidence of corruption. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Dear God. She found something, didn't she?" I think she found proof that Harrison was taking bribes to throw cases. I think she confronted him, and I think—" Tom stopped. "Mrs. Henderson, I found Rebecca." Martha sat down heavily on a stool behind the counter. Tears welled in her eyes. "Where?" "In the cabin. In her father's darkroom. She's been there the whole time." "Henry." Martha's voice broke. "Oh, Henry. He died thinking she'd abandoned him." "I need to contact someone who isn't connected to the local police. Sheriff Coleman came by yesterday. He knew about the darkroom before I mentioned it." "He threatened me." Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then reached for a notepad. "There's a journalist, Jake Mitchell. He's been investigating Rebecca's disappearance for years. His sister was Rebecca's best friend. Died by suicide a few years back. Never got over losing Rebecca." She wrote down a name and phone number. "Jake's been asking questions Harrison doesn't like. He's had his tires slashed, his apartment broken into. But he won't quit. Where can I find him?" "He works out of his home in Lake Placid, 20 miles north. But Mr. Brennan—" Martha gripped his arm. "If you're going after Harrison, you need to understand what you're up against. He's not just a senator. He's being considered for vice president. He has money, connections, power. And if he killed Rebecca to hide his secrets, he won't hesitate to kill you. I'm not afraid of dying, Mrs. Henderson. I came to that cabin expecting to die. What about your dog?" Tom glanced through the window at his truck where Duke waited patiently. "He deserves better than what I can give him. But maybe I can give him purpose. One last mission." Martha made a phone call. 15 minutes later, Jake Mitchell walked through the door. He was younger than Tom expected, early 40s with dark hair graying at the temples and the wary eyes of someone who'd learned to trust carefully. He carried a weathered messenger bag and moved with the nervous energy of a man who'd been running on caffeine and determination for too long. "You're Brennan," Jake said without preamble. "Martha says you found something." Tom showed him the photographs on his phone. Jake's composure cracked when he saw the image of Rebecca's driver's license, still readable after 25 years. "Jesus Christ." Jake's voice was barely audible. "It's really her. You knew her?" "My sister Emily, she and Rebecca were best friends since kindergarten. When Rebecca disappeared, Emily never recovered. She kept saying Rebecca wouldn't just leave, that something bad had happened. Everyone told her she was in denial, that she needed to move on." Jake's jaw tightened. "She killed herself 5 years later, left a note that said, 'Maybe now I can find out what happened to Becca.'" They moved to Jake's car for privacy. Tom showed him everything: the documents, the evidence of Harrison's corruption, the photographs of Rebecca's body, the scratch marks inside the freezer. Jake was silent for a long time, studying each image. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled but cold with fury. "I've been researching this for 10 years. I knew Harrison was dirty, but I could never prove it. I found a pattern. 4 people connected to cases Harrison prosecuted have died in accidents over the past 20 years. A defense attorney who said he had new evidence, a court clerk who questioned document dates, a private investigator who was looking into Harrison's finances, a journalist, a colleague of mine, who was about to publish an exposé. You think Harrison killed them all? I think Harrison has people who kill for him. He's too smart to get his own hands dirty." Jake pulled out a laptop. "But this is different. This is physical evidence. A body, documents. This is what I've been waiting for. Can you get this to the FBI? I have contacts there, but it'll take time to build a case properly. 72 hours at minimum. Harrison's connected. If we move too fast, if there's any procedural error, his lawyers will tear it apart." Jake met Tom's eyes. "Can you hold that cabin for 3 days?" Tom thought about Sheriff Coleman's threat. about the fact that someone had been monitoring the cabin, about being 68 years old with a dying dog and 12 rounds of ammunition. "Yeah, I can try. I'll work as fast as possible, but Tom, you need backup. Let me call someone." Jake made another call. 20 minutes later, a silver sedan pulled up. The woman who emerged was Tom's age, compact and sturdy, with short gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore practical clothes and moved with the confident efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in crisis situations. "Emily Chen," she introduced herself, shaking Tom's hand with a grip that had once set broken bones and started IVs under fire. Jake called, said an old soldier needed help. "Turns out I know you, Tom Brennan. We served in the same unit in '69. You probably don't remember me." Tom studied her face, and suddenly he did. "Medic. You pulled 3 guys out of a burning APC during the Tet Offensive, and you covered us while I did it." She smiled briefly. "Jake tells me you found Rebecca Morse. That girl was murdered by a man who's about to become vice president, and you're planning to sit in an isolated cabin for 3 days while the bad guys come for you." "That's about the size of it. Then you're going to need a combat medic." Emily opened her trunk, revealing a well-stocked medical kit, and, Tom noted with approval, a deer rifle. "I'm in." They returned to the cabin as a convoy. Tom's battered pickup, Jake's sedan, and Emily's SUV. The sun was already dropping toward the mountains, and with it, the temperature. The weather forecast predicted another blizzard rolling in by midnight. Perfect cover for an assault. Emily surveyed the cabin with a tactical eye. Defensible, but barely. Single story, too many windows, only one exit. She walked the perimeter, Duke limping beside her. "We need to reinforce these walls. Block some windows entirely, create firing positions in others." Jake was already unloading equipment: a satellite phone, backup batteries, a police scanner, and recording equipment. "If anything happens, I need documentation. Video, audio, everything." Tom felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the old familiar rhythm of a team preparing for combat. It steadied him. He wasn't alone anymore. They worked through the afternoon, boarding windows from the inside, stacking furniture as barricades, creating clear lines of sight. Emily set up a medical station in Rebecca's old bedroom. Bandages, antibiotics, IV fluids, morphine. She was preparing for casualties. "Hope for the best, plan for the worst," she said when she caught Tom watching. "That's what kept us alive in '69. As darkness fell, they gathered around the fire. Duke lay between Tom and Emily, his breathing shallow but steady. Jake had cooked a simple meal, canned stew heated over the fire. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Jake spoke. "Tell me about your son." Tom stiffened. Emily shot Jake a warning glance, but Tom surprised himself by answering. "Michael. He was 24 when he died. Drunk driver ran a red light. Michael was on his way home from his shift. He was a military police officer at Fort Drum." Tom's voice remained steady through force of will. "Duke was his partner. They'd served together in Afghanistan. After Michael died, they gave Duke to me." "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "Michael was a lot like Rebecca, I think. Believed in doing the right thing, no matter the cost." Tom looked at the photograph of Rebecca on the wall. She was trying to expose corruption. Michael died enforcing laws that were supposed to protect people. They both believed the system could work if good people stood up. "Did they die for nothing?" Jake asked. It wasn't accusatory, it was genuine, raw. "I used to think so," Tom admitted. "After Sarah died, after Michael, I thought the universe was just cruel and random. That being good, doing right, it didn't matter. What changed? Finding Rebecca." Tom met Jake's eyes. "Someone has to speak for the dead. Someone has to make their deaths mean something. Maybe that's what we're here for." Emily checked the police scanner. Static, routine chatter. Nothing about the cabin. Yet, "Tom," she said carefully, "I need to ask. Duke's not going to make it through this, is he?" The question landed like a physical blow. Tom looked at his dog, Michael's dog, sleeping fitfully by the fire. Duke's muzzle was gray, his breathing labored. The tumor was winning. "No," Tom said finally. "The vet said 2 months, maybe 3. That was 3 weeks ago. If shooting starts, if they use tear gas or smoke grenades, the stress could—" "I know," Tom's voice cracked. "I brought him here so he could die in peace. Instead, I'm going to get him killed in a firefight." Emily moved to sit beside him. She didn't offer false comfort, didn't tell him it would be okay. She just sat there, a silent presence that understood loss and guilt and the weight of impossible choices. "He's a soldier," Emily said finally. "Like you, like Michael. Soldiers don't get to choose their deaths. They just get to choose what they die for." The first assault came at 9 o'clock. No warning, no demands, just the sudden explosion of breaking glass and the acrid smell of tear gas canisters bouncing across the floor. Tom had been expecting it, but the speed was still shocking. "Gas masks!" Emily shouted, already pulling hers on. They'd prepared for this, bought surplus military masks from an Army-Navy store that afternoon. Tom secured his, then pulled Duke close, wrapping a wet towel around the dog's muzzle. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Through the gas, Tom saw shapes moving outside. 3 men, maybe 4, wearing tactical gear. Not police. These were contractors, professionals. They moved with military precision toward the cabin. Tom fired through a gun port they'd created. Not to kill, just to establish that this wouldn't be easy. The shot hit the ground near the lead man's feet. The team scattered, taking cover. "FBI!" one of them shouted. "Come out with your hands up!" "Bullshit!" Emily yelled back. "Show me a warrant!" The response was another gas canister through a different window. These men weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to eliminate a problem. Jake was recording everything, his camera capturing the assault, the tear gas, the paramilitary tactics. "Keep them talking," he hissed to Tom. "I need clear audio of them refusing to identify properly. Why haven't you called the real FBI?" Tom fired another round, forcing one attacker back behind a tree. "Because they don't know we have satellite phones," Jake said. "Because they think we're isolated. Because in 90 minutes my editor receives an automated email with everything we've documented. They're on a clock now, not us." Outside, someone was shouting orders. Regrouping. The first assault had been a probe, testing their defenses. The next one would be serious. Duke struggled to his feet despite the gas, despite his illness. He positioned himself between Tom and the door, teeth bared. Still protecting, still serving. Tom's eyes burned. From the gas, and from something deeper. The second assault came 30 minutes later, coordinated and vicious. They hit from 2 sides simultaneously, front and back. Tom heard the crash of the rear door being breached as he fired at movement near the front window. "Back door!" Emily shouted, swinging her rifle around. A man in tactical gear crashed through, weapon raised. Emily fired first. The shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He fell hard, cursing, his weapon clattering across the floor. Duke launched himself at the fallen man despite his illness, despite the tumor that should have made movement agonizing. The dog's jaws clamped onto the man's leg. The intruder screamed, trying to shake Duke off. "Duke, release!" Tom commanded. The dog obeyed instantly, backing away but keeping his eyes locked on the threat. Tom zip-tied the wounded man's hands, then dragged him to the corner. Emily was already applying pressure to the shoulder wound. "You're bleeding out," she told him matter-of-factly. "And talk and I save your life. Stay silent, and you've got maybe 20 minutes. The man's face was pale with shock and pain. He couldn't have been more than 30. "I want a lawyer." You're not under arrest. We're not cops. So you don't get a lawyer, you get a choice, bleed or talk. Emily's voice was clinical. Who sent you? Outside, someone was shouting orders, regrouping again. Tom counted at least 3 more hostiles still mobile. The wounded man's resolve broke as blood soaked through Emily's makeshift bandage. Private contractor, Blackwood Security, we got the call 6 hours ago. Clean up a problem in the Adirondacks, $20,000 each. Who made the call? Jake had his camera rolling, documenting everything. I don't know names. Orders came through our handler. The man winced as Emily tightened the bandage, but I heard him on the phone before we deployed. He called someone senator. Jake's eyes met Tom's. Harrison was directly involved. The next assault was different. No dramatic breach, no frontal charge, just the sudden smell of gasoline and the whoosh of flames. They were burning them out. Fire spread fast along the cabin's dry wooden walls. Within minutes, the temperature inside became unbearable. Smoke filled the room despite their masks. They had maybe 5 minutes before the structure became unstable. "We have to go out!" Emily shouted over the roar of flames. Tom looked at Duke. The dog was barely standing, exhausted from his earlier effort. The heat and smoke were destroying what little strength he had left. If they went out the front door, they'd be cut down immediately. If they stayed, they'd burn. "The root cellar," Jake said suddenly. "Old cabins like this, they always had root cellars for food storage. There should be an exterior entrance." They found it in Rebecca's old bedroom, a wooden panel in the floor camouflaged by the bed frame. Tom wrenched it open. Below was a narrow space, maybe 4 feet deep, with a dirt floor, and at the far end, a second door leading outside, away from the front of the cabin. "Go," Tom ordered. "I'll cover." Emily didn't argue. She helped Jake lower the wounded contractor into the cellar, then climbed down herself. Tom lifted Duke, feeling how light the dog had become, how frail. Duke licked his face once. Forgiveness or goodbye? Tom lowered Duke to Emily's waiting arms, then followed, pulling the trapdoor shut above him just as part of the ceiling collapsed in flames. The exterior cellar door was old but functional. It opened onto the back side of the cabin, hidden from the main assault team by the building itself. They emerged into freezing night air, coughing smoke from their lungs. The cabin was an inferno now, flames reaching 20 feet into the night sky. Tom could hear the attackers on the far side, probably assuming everyone inside was dead or dying. They ran or stumbled into the tree line. Tom carried Duke, the dog's breathing shallow and rapid. Emily supported the wounded contractor. Jake had his laptop and phone still recording, still documenting. 100 yards into the forest, they stopped to regroup. The contractor was going into shock. Emily worked on him with practiced efficiency, but her expression was grim. "He needs a hospital," she said quietly. "So do we," Jake added. His hands were shaking as he checked his footage. "But I got it. All of it. The assault, the firebombing, his confession about being hired by Harrison. It's enough." Tom set Duke down gently on a bed of pine needles. The dog's eyes were half closed. His breathing labored. This was it. The end Tom had been trying to avoid, happening in the worst possible way. "I'm sorry, boy," Tom whispered. "This wasn't how it was supposed to be." Duke's tail moved slightly, still trying to comfort his human, even now. Then they heard it, a sound that didn't belong in this frozen wilderness. The deep, rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors, multiple aircraft approaching fast. Tom's first thought was that Harrison had called in more firepower. They were finished, but the helicopters that appeared over the tree line bore FBI markings. Spotlights swept the burning cabin, the forest, catching the tactical team in brilliant white light. "Federal agents, drop your weapons! Hands on your heads!" The assault team scattered, but there was nowhere to go. More helicopters, more agents. Within minutes, the contractors were on the ground, cuffed, surrounded. Sheriff Coleman's cruiser came skidding into the clearing, lights flashing. He jumped out, weapon drawn, looking confused and panicked. An FBI agent intercepted him immediately. "Sheriff Richard Coleman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and corruption." Coleman's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, denial, then resignation. "I want immunity. I'll tell you everything." A tall woman in an FBI windbreaker approached Tom's position in the woods. "Thomas Brennan?" Tom nodded, still holding Duke. "Special Agent Sarah Morrison. We've been tracking Senator Harrison for 6 months. Jake Mitchell's evidence package arrived 2 hours ago. He set it to auto-send if he didn't check in. Between that and the call we received from Sheriff Coleman 40 minutes ago, we had enough for warrants." She looked at the burning cabin. Coleman's conscience apparently caught up with him. "Called us directly, confessed to everything, told us you were about to be killed." "Coleman helped us?" Tom couldn't process it. He said his son asked him if heroes do what's right. "Something about reading a bedtime story." Morrison shrugged. "Sometimes people surprise you. He's still going to prison, but his testimony puts Harrison away forever." EMTs were arriving now, setting up triage. Emily waved them over for the wounded contractor. Jake was already being interviewed by federal agents, showing them his documentation. Tom just sat in the snow, holding Duke. The dog's breathing had become irregular. His eyes opened briefly, found Tom's face, and something like peace settled over him. "You did good, boy," Tom whispered. "You found her. You saved me. You were the best of us." Duke's chest rose one more time, then settled. His eyes closed. He was gone. Tom sat there, cradling his dead dog, surrounded by federal agents and burning wreckage, and the promise of justice finally being served. He'd come to this cabin to die. Instead, he'd lived long enough to see the truth revealed. But the price, God, the price. The hospital in Lake Placid smelled like all hospitals, antiseptic and defeat. Tom sat in the emergency room with superficial burns on his hands and smoke inhalation that made every breath ache. Emily had been treated and released. Jake was giving his statement to federal agents in a private room. Tom just wanted to leave, but Agent Morrison had questions. "Senator Harrison was arrested 3 hours ago," she said, sitting across from him in the consultation room. "At his home in Albany. He's already lawyering up, claiming he knows nothing about any assault on your property." "Coleman will testify," Tom said. His voice was hoarse from smoke. "He will. And we have Jake Mitchell's documentation, the recordings of the assault, the confession from the wounded contractor, Rebecca Morse's body, and the evidence she compiled." Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, we've been building a case against Harrison for 6 months. We knew he was corrupt, but we couldn't prove the murders. You handed us everything we needed. I didn't do it for you. I know. You did it for a girl who died 25 years ago." Morrison's expression softened. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about your dog." Tom looked at his hands. They'd taken Duke's body for now, evidence in the assault case. They'd promised to return him for burial. But it felt wrong, Duke in some morgue freezer like he was just another piece of evidence. "He was a good dog," Tom said quietly. "He was a hero." Morrison stood. "The media's already picking this up. Senator's secret past exposed. You're going to be famous whether you want to be or not." "I don't want to be famous. I want to go home." "Where's home, Mr. Brennan?" Tom realized he didn't have an answer. The cabin was gone. His apartment lease had expired. He'd surrendered it when he bought the property. He had nowhere. Emily found him an hour later, still sitting in the consultation room, staring at nothing. "You're coming with me," she said. It wasn't a question. Emily's house was small but comfortable, 20 miles outside Lake Placid. She set Tom up in her guest room, made him tea he didn't drink, and sat with him in silence until he was ready to talk. "I keep thinking about Michael," Tom said finally. "How I wasn't there when he died. How I didn't get to say goodbye. I promised myself I'd be there for Duke, that he wouldn't die alone." "And then—" "He didn't die alone," Emily interrupted. "He died in your arms, after doing what he was born to do. Protecting you, serving with honor. That's not a bad death, Tom. He deserved better. We all deserve better than we get, but Duke had 10 years with you, 10 years of love and purpose after Michael died. You gave him that." Tom's hands shook. He'd held himself together through Vietnam, through Sarah's long dying, through Michael's funeral. But this, losing Duke while fighting someone else's battle, finally broke something inside him. He wept. Emily held his hand and let him. The trial took 8 months. Tom attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Martha Henderson on one side and Jake Mitchell on the other. Emily came when she could. They became a strange little family, bound by grief and purpose. Harrison's defense was elaborate. He'd been framed. He knew nothing about any murders. Sheriff Coleman was lying to save himself. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, Rebecca's documentation, Coleman's testimony about 25 years of covering up crimes, the assault on Tom's cabin recorded in detail by Jake. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder for Rebecca Morse. Second-degree murder for 4 others, whose deaths Harrison had orchestrated over the years. Conspiracy, corruption, obstruction of justice, life in prison without possibility of parole. 5 consecutive life sentences. When the verdict was read, Harrison stood and screamed, "I was going to be vice president. I've done more good than that girl ever could have. She was nobody." The judge ordered him removed. As bailiffs dragged him away, still shouting, Tom felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sense of victory, just exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them. Tom pushed through without comment. But Jake stopped, turned to face the cameras. Rebecca Morse was 19 years old when she was murdered for trying to expose corruption, Jake said, his voice steady and clear. She was brilliant, compassionate, and brave. She deserves to be remembered not as a victim, but as someone who gave her life trying to protect others. My sister Emily never stopped believing that Rebecca mattered. Today, finally, the world agrees. 3 months after the trial, they held a memorial service at Riverside Cemetery in Keene Valley. Rebecca's body had finally been released by the medical examiner, her remains properly prepared for burial. The turnout surprised Tom. Hundreds of people, old friends of Rebecca's, now middle-aged with families of their own. Former classmates, people whose lives had been touched by Harrison's corruption and who saw Rebecca's courage as vindication. Martha Henderson was there in a wheelchair, brought from the nursing home by her family. She'd had a stroke the week after Harrison's arrest, but insisted on attending. Tom helped wheel her to the graveside. He'd visited Martha regularly over the past months. Sometimes she knew him. Often she didn't. But today, she was lucid. "Thank you," Martha whispered, gripping Tom's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you for bringing my girl home. I'm sorry it took so long. You gave me peace. That's everything." They buried Rebecca next to her father Henry. The headstone read, "Rebecca Morse, 1980-1999. She fought for truth and justice. She will not be forgotten." Tom stood at the grave long after the service ended. Finally, he was alone except for Emily, waiting patiently by her car. "You ready?" she called gently. Tom pulled something from his pocket. Duke's service collar, worn and faded. He'd been carrying it since the hospital. Now he knelt and placed it carefully at the base of Rebecca's headstone. "Duke found you," he said quietly. "He was a good dog. The best. I hope, wherever you both are, you know you mattered." He stood, his joints protesting. 69 years old now. Everything hurt. But he was still here. Emily drove them back to her house where Tom had been staying. It wasn't home, but it was something. "I got a call today," Emily said as they pulled into her driveway. "From the Rebecca Morse Foundation." "What's that?" "Apparently several families of Harrison's other victims pooled money. They want to create a foundation to help solve cold cases, support families of missing persons. They want you to be involved." Tom stared at her. "Why me?" "Because you didn't give up. Because you proved that truth matters, even after 25 years. She smiled. "Because you're a stubborn old soldier who can't help but fight for people who can't fight for themselves." Tom thought about that, about purpose, about legacy, about Michael, who'd believed in justice, about Sarah, who'd always told him he had a hero complex, about Duke, who'd served until his last breath. "Tell them yes," he said. The next morning, Tom drove to the animal shelter in Lake Placid. He'd been avoiding it for months, not ready. But Emily was right. He needed purpose, not just grief. The shelter was crowded and noisy. Dogs barked from every kennel, hoping to be chosen. Tom walked slowly past them all, his heart aching. None of them were Duke. None of them could be. Then he saw her, an older German shepherd, maybe 8 or 9 years old, lying quietly in the back of her kennel while younger dogs clamored for attention. Her coat was the same black and tan as Duke's. Her eyes were gentle, tired. The shelter worker noticed Tom's interest. "That's Hope, former military working dog. Her handler died last year, heart attack. Family couldn't keep her. She's been here 6 months." The worker's expression was sad. "We're scheduled to euthanize her next week. Nobody wants an old dog." Tom opened the kennel door. Hope lifted her head, studied him calmly. No jumping, no desperate pleading, just quiet dignity. Tom knelt. "Hey, girl." Hope stood slowly, limped forward, arthritis probably, and rested her muzzle on Tom's shoulder, just like Duke used to do. Tom's vision blurred. "I can't replace him," he whispered. Hope licked his cheek once. Understanding, or perhaps forgiveness. "She's mine," Tom told the worker. That spring, Tom stood at Rebecca's grave again. Hope sat beside him, well-fed now, her coat shining, her tail wagging softly. "I found a new partner," Tom said to the headstone. "Her name's Hope." Seemed appropriate. He'd spent the winter helping establish the Rebecca Morse Foundation, reaching out to families, funding investigations, giving people what he'd given Martha, closure, or at least the possibility of it. The first case they'd helped solve had closed just last week. A missing woman from 2015, found alive, rescued from a nightmare. Tom had met her family, seen their tears of joy and relief. It hadn't brought Michael back, it hadn't brought Duke back, but it meant something. "I came to your father's cabin to die," Tom said to Rebecca's grave. "Thank you for teaching me how to live instead." Hope nudged his hand. Time to go. Work to do. Tom Brennan walked away from the cemetery, an old dog at his side, heading toward whatever came next. He was 70 years old. He hurt in places he'd forgotten he had, but he'd found something he'd thought was lost forever. Purpose. The end. Tom Brennan thought his story was over. A widower, grieving father, dying dog, and a $100 cabin where he planned his final days. But behind a locked door he found Rebecca Morse, a young woman silenced for 25 years, and discovered that even in our darkest hours, purpose can find us. Some of us carry guilt for battles we didn't fight, goodbyes we never said, or loved ones we couldn't save. We wonder if we still matter, if there's time left to make a difference. Tom learned that it's never too late to stand for truth, that loyalty, whether from a faithful dog or unexpected friends, can carry us through impossible odds, and that our greatest legacy isn't what we leave behind, but who we fight for when we have nothing left to lose. Duke didn't live to see justice served, but his final mission gave meaning to both their lives. Sometimes the end we're walking toward becomes the beginning we never expected. Your voice still matters. Your courage still counts. What truth have you been carrying that the world needs to hear? Have you ever found unexpected purpose when you thought your story was finished? Share your thoughts below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.